When I made my short breakdown on Twitter about the changes to Trunks for this patch, I had quite a couple of people commenting, oh, why would they nerf Trunks? Like, come on, man, he wasn't that good. No, Trunks was the top 3 character in the last patch and definitely a character that needed some nerfs. So I'm actually very interested in discussing how Bandai tried to go about nerfing Trunks in this patch, because most of the changes here aren't the nerfs that I would have personally done, but I think it is a bit revealing in how Bandai approaches their buffs and nerfs, because while it's very clear that when they buff characters, they give them new tools or they try to improve some things. When they nerf a character, they don't tend to take those buffs away as they try to do something else to offset the strength of the buffs that they were able to give. So without further ado, we're going to jump into discussing Trunks. The very first change in his kit is actually a buff, where it comes to his standing light attack follow-up 1, so the second hit of his auto combo where they reduce the delay. As you can see, it took about 42 frames before for him to complete the whole action. And if I try to hold up immediately, well, then there was, some frames of recovery there, about, 46, which takes the 4 frames to jump. On block, this was -7, so an unsafe stagger point for Trunks. So let's look at how they buff 5LL in the current patch. They reduce the delay of the move, meaning it has less recovery. So in neutral, it's about 2 less frames. So instead of being like frame 42 for recovery, instead you're getting to about frame 40. Which, is kind of nice there. But more importantly, this also means that instead of being -7 in block strings, it's now -5, giving Trunks a safe stagger point, which he will appreciate, although there are some other nerfs that kind of just result in this being a net change for Trunks. All of his light attacks outside of 5LLL are now safe on block. Meanwhile, his mediums and his heavies are still very unsafe, and with another change that we'll talk about later in his kit, his pressure is a little worse in this patch overall. Still, he does appreciate being able to stagger off a 5LL, although in neutral, you could argue that makes it safer for you to stop pressing here, but why not just full send it with your invincible auto combo? After all, you're -7, spaced out from the opponent, and of course, if they block it, well, you just have special moves follow-ups to really go for here. So it is a buff for Trunks, but not really a serious one, nor one that's really going to offset the couple of nerfs that we're going to be seeing applied to him. Now getting into the bigger changes for Trunks. In the previous patch, Bandai decided that Trunks needed a true full-screen normal. Now, most of the time when I think people talk about full-screen normals, they think about normals that might be like Trunks' 2M, which, goes a pretty good distance, right? You walk forward a little bit, and this guy is going to reach and catch you pretty quickly, about 15 frame startup. From those medium ranges, it's 12 frame startup point blank range. But they gave a second version for this normal to Trunks in his 3M. And it truly is a full screen normal. It is slightly slower in terms of its travel time, at least when you consider like how long it goes. They really just increased the active frames on it. But, from full screen, getting in with an 18 frame, sliding low is kind of crazy, because a good Trunks player can count your air actions and then basically force you to block this normal on the ground. And if you're trying to jump around in neutral and you're buffering the next jump by coming down and pressing up again, you can get caught holding up back and die for this, because even though these are 2 different normals, right? For some reason, this is still scaled like a medium starter. I don't know why that's the case. I mean, this is truly like the meme realize of Dragon Ball FighterZ having full screen normals. Most of the time you have to get a little bit closer, make a committal dash movement first to get in ranges, but Trunks didn't have to do that. He was just in on you. And again, for demonstration, this is a 2M starter. I actually was able to complete the combo there, and if I did it with the 3M version, it would have done the same damage. And this isn't even going into the more optimal things that you can do with Trunks in these current versions of the game. It's just to demonstrate the fact that this is an unscaled medium starter normal. And part of the reasons why they did this was for combos' sake. So if I gave Trunks a little bit of a meter, the idea behind giving him this normal was to make it so that he could combo off of his EX overhead in mid-screen. That 3M basically facilitated all of that damage because of the fact that you could go into 2M and then launch the opponent with 5 heavy, thus giving you Masenko super dash extensions, and there's a lot more that you can do there, of course. But the unfortunate thing is, when they gave that buff to Trunks, I don't think they considered the neutral applications for the character. You could not really play footsies against Trunks. Like at full screen, he could just lock you down with things like his 5S or with this 3M. You had to be very defensive and passive against Trunks because he was that dominating in neutral, and both of those options I just mentioned were pretty good combo starters as well. So how would Bandai go about nerfing this? Now, with regards to 3M, what I personally would have done was made it so that it was a light starter. You know, let it keep the utility and the speed, but why have it be a medium starter? Maybe just have it so that in the later active frames of the move, it only scaled as a light normal. Bandai's approach to nerfing this move was to pretty much make it unusable in Trunks' kit by having it be way, way slower on startup. So, as you can see from full screen, it's about 5 to 4 frames slower. And the fact that this is now 23 frames startup instead of like 18 means that it is far more reactable. I mean, just this difference alone means that in situations where you would have caught your opponent's jump normal, not jump normal, but just jumping, now they're able to actually jump and escape this. Not to mention, it does differentiate the move up close against the opponent, since previously these moves were virtually identical. However, this also permeates into other aspects of Trunks' kit, where I think the issue with the move was the fact that it was a neutral tool, and it was such a good neutral tool, but this also basically kills its utility and the whole reason the move was added to his kit in the first place, which was to combo off of his grounded EX overhead. With the comically slower startup, you can no longer link this now, which basically nerfs Trunks' damage off of this attack now because you just don't get a medium into a heavy anymore. Not even the 2M version is able to reach here because its active frames, I think, expire before the opponent actually reaches. Like, this is such a baffling nerf to me. It's like, why get rid of the combo utility of the move when the neutral issue and the reward of that neutral issue was the problem? Like, there was probably some fine tuning, I feel like, that could have been done one way or another to preserve that route, but maybe this is also what they decided to do, because it's not like you still can't get combos off of the EX overhead. Their routes are just going to look significantly different. And of course, if you're in the corner, well, then everything is pretty much fine. So this basically operates to nerf Trunks' ability to pick up off of this mix-up move in the middle of the screen. So now he's going to have to settle for combo routes that do a lot less damage than they were before. The next move to talk about is Trunks' Ki Blast 5S. This was a war crime Ki Blast in the previous patch. They made it about 8 frames startup at point blank range, and thus it also would hit the opponent from full screen at frame 15. This is incredibly fast compared to many other Ki Blasts, on top of having higher durability than our Ki Blast, which makes sense. It's a single hit Ki Blast that's fairly committal for Trunks to do, but it was honestly also pretty safe on block. You know, it was -5, so you could even use this in stagger pressure, or you could poke out with this from full screen and really not have to commit to anything else. Not only that, if you did get a hit with it, because of its ability to combo into Masenko from full screen, you were able to get some pretty decently high damage combos. Just for a more streamlined basic example, off of a 5S hit in neutral, you could take upwards of 3,816 damage. It is possible for Trunks to do a re-jump here, but after nailing it once and then being unable to replicate it again, I decided to opt for this a little more straightforward combo that does require resources. But in the hands of an expert Trunks player, you can definitely break this metric of damage. All of this from a 15-frame Ki Blast, by the way. Now, 5S has been nerfed in a way that I wouldn't have personally done. But that doesn't mean I'm against it. It's just not the solutions or the potential solutions that I would have thought of. I always kind of viewed that the issue with 5S was how fast it was. 8 frame startup, pretty close range, and in fact, it's still 8 frame startup, which means that it still is going to jail you at round start and lead to a bunch of messed up scenarios for Trunks. But what Bandai has tried to do is limit how safe the move is, as well as reduce the reward it gives you. So they've increased the recovery on the move. So previously, this was -5 on block. Now it's -14. This is heinously unsafe, and it actually is a huge nerf to Trunks' pressure. We did talk about how 5LL is now a safe stagger point, but Trunks has lost a safe stagger point because of that 5S change. Now, if he does this, I mean, he's gambling with his life. He basically has to be thinking about what option he wants to cancel into to try and frame trap the opponent, because if he just sits there, he is risking a medium starter punish in this safe stagger situation. And it also means that once Trunks commits to his mediums, there is no safe stagger for him anymore. He has to like go all the way through and end his pressure at some point, probably into Change the Future. So it makes him a little more difficult to steal the turn away from you when he is making you block. The other change that they have done is to the damage scaling of the move itself. So any combo you get after this is going to scale worse than it did before. Previously, this combo did 3,800 damage, and now it's only doing 3,000, a loss of 800 damage. And I imagine you're going to see similar losses in damage for Trunks off of this normal, like regardless of the position on screen and what routes that you get here. I don't hate this change. I kind of like the idea of, yes, this is a pretty oppressive Ki Blast tool for Trunks to have in his kit, but if you do get clipped by it, at least you're not dying for it. So I kind of see the give and take here. I personally would have reduced like how oppressive it is. After all, it's still a very annoying move to contend with at round start situations, and Trunks can still create 50-50s and mix-up opportunities with this move. And I feel like that's like the deeper issue here. But I guess in a situation where if you get clipped by this randomly, you're not exploding for it, I do think that is probably a fair nerf. Not the one I would have done, but it's a nerf that I will accept. Now let's talk about the next nerf in Trunks' kit, which is to Trunks' heavy shining slash attack. At point blank range, this is about 20 frame startup, which can be very difficult to react to, especially in a offline console environment that you see most competitive competitions take place on. The damage was also pretty high, 1650 for the initial hit itself, and because the opponent slides towards Trunks, with the old version of 3M, you were able to pick up some pretty high damage combos. Again, breaking 4,000 on something as basic as that. There's definitely a lot more complicated things that you can do with Trunks depending on your position on screen. If you're near the corner, for example, well, you basically got to go into Trunks' corner routing. The fact that this was a hard to react to overhead that led to a lot of rewards on hit for Trunks was another aspect that made him a very dominant character in the previous patch. Well, at least very strong. The thing I feel like with Trunks is that we didn't get to see too much of him just because there weren't enough high-level players really playing him at that strength, which I guess is something you could argue about most of the cast at this point. Dragon Ball FighterZ isn't as popular as it used to be, but make no mistake, just because Trunks wasn't getting a whole lot of results or had a whole lot of representation didn't mean that he wasn't strong before. Now, let's talk about how they changed this move. So how do they go nerf Shining Slash? Well, much like the other parts of Trunks' kit I've talked about, they didn't really nerf the utility of the move. Instead, they've targeted the reward of the move. It's still a 20 frame overhead. But you might notice that the damage on the initial hits is actually less. It does 1,500 damage in total instead of the 1,650 damage that we saw in the previous patch. And there is another change to it as well, and that is to the scaling of the combos as well. They scale harder now. Now, obviously, there's also a bit of a double nerf happening here because, as I've demonstrated, you can no longer combo into either of Trunks' crouching medium attacks off of this move in mid-screen. 2M has the same issue of it just like stops working at that moment that it would make contact with the opponent, and 3M is comically way too slow to work now. You can, of course, still get it in the corner, which we'll explore that routing in a moment or so. But the other thing to also pay attention to here is going to be to how Trunks has to confirm off of this in the mid-screen. Because of the nerfs to 3M, you now have to go for 5S confirms. which also means that your smash launcher is going to be preserved at the following hit. So Trunks' routes off of overhead and mid-screen are going to change. Let's compare a combo routing in the corner just to see how much damage Trunks has lost due to the scaling changes. So let's look at the damage you used to be able to get off of EX overhead in the corner. $4,291 with a pretty basic combo. With a route like that, now we do 3,666 damage. I don't know if there's more optimal routes than here, but this was a pretty basic Trunks combo I could show off in the corner to sell the damage difference to you. Previously, Trunks' Heat Dome attack, when you use the light and medium version of it, was an unreactable super command grab. Basically, if you saw the super flash and tried to jump, it was probably too late. There, I'm like jumping as soon as his hands are going there. So if you're able to react to this, you were able to escape, but that was easier said than done. You'll also note that the move hit on frame 10 in that previous patch. And this was sort of like a Raging Demon style of move previously for Trunks, just adding on to the layer of mental stack and the fact that he could basically cheese you out of a game by hitting this attack on you. You know, and almost do 50,000 damage off of a command throw. Now, the patch notes themselves say that they increased the animation time for the level 3. Looking at the actual process of what's going on, though, it definitely feels a little bit weird to digest. So in the previous patch, we got to see that this was a 10-frame startup grab. Now check it out in the current patch. Training mode says it's 7-frame startup. So is it faster? Is it slower? It feels like I think that there is a little bit more time when Trunks puts his hands out before the super flash animation. But this is something that I'm not really going to be able to fully explore unless we do this frame by frame. The final change for Trunks in this patch is to his C assist, which actually is regarded as a buff. So previously, Trunks' C assist would behave like this. Little bit of a delay in between the first and the second hit of the attack where he launches you into the air. And I think that at times there might have been some instances where, depending on how your hit was against the opponent, sometimes that second hit could drop and the whole C assist would fail. Granted, I don't really have an example of that on hand right now, but I can definitely recall some games where Trunks' C assist didn't fully confirm when I think it should have. Now let's take a look at the new timing for the attacks from Trunks' C assist. It seems like the third hit is just a little bit faster than it was previously. So ideally this means that Trunks should no longer drop the opponent when you're actually hit confirming with this tool. Again, I don't really have an example of this failing, but I do remember some games where this would be the case that would happen. So it's a nice little buff for Trunks, and maybe more dedicated Trunks C assist players would be able to point out some moments in the comments below. Now, I know I've been talking a lot about how Trunks has been nerfed throughout this video, and I probably can imagine that there's going to be plenty of commenters below who are wondering, why was he ever nerfed? Again, this was a top 3 character in the previous patch. I know that he doesn't quite have the representation of results at a competitive level, but that doesn't change the fact that he was a strong frustrating character to fight in the previous patch. And he pretty much still has all the same tools that he did before. 5S is still a really good Ki Blast, even if it is a little less safe to use in neutral, and it's definitely dead in terms of his stagger pressure, and that's a pretty substantial nerf, I would definitely say. And while he is getting less damage off of mix-ups like his overhead confirmed, thanks to the nerfs in the patch, he is still able to mix you with it and get those hits. He's still able to fulfill various criteria of being a strong enough character in Dragon Ball FighterZ by two-touching you off of a lot of these moves. He's just not as like brain dead ignorant, I think, as he was before. There has to be like just a little bit more like meter and resources that he needs in order to kill you. So he's not as good of a battery as he was before. He's still great at spending a whole bunch of bar, and he still has plenty of really good things going on with him. I will say that the 3M nerf is a pretty comically done one. Like, it's just almost like a worthless normal to me now. It's like, I don't ever see a context where I ever want to press this normal unless like there's just certain combo routing that it helps like stabilize in some way, shape, or form. But like outside of that, I do want to stress that I still think Trunks is a very good character, and he still has access to one of the most obnoxious round starts in the game for a lot of the cast with his 8-frame 5S. So I wouldn't discount Trunks out. And I mean, these are pretty tame nerfs overall. I like the approach that I didn't consider, which was to nerf the reward that you get with these moves rather than nerfing the tools themselves. We've kind of seen this actually repeat in several other patches, right? Where sometimes the damage has been toned down or maybe some other property's been adjusted. I do like these changes overall for Trunks. I do think that they do tone him down in the right ways. I do kind of wish 3M was a little bit different for like the sake of his mid-screen routing. Like the damage nerf and the scaling nerf to his EX overhead I think was enough, but I do also have to say that like 3M in neutral before was unacceptable. I'm very happy to see that go. I just wish that it kept its combo utility so that we weren't feeling like a double nerf off of the overheads with Trunks. We'll see where he ends up. I do think that you might have to be a little bit more specialized and rely on a little bit more left-right flip mix-ups with the character now, as opposed to just when do you throw out the EX overhead to then do 4K damage. And you definitely need to have a lot more resources on hand for him. His tools are still there. They're still effective. They are a little bit worse in this patch, but he's still in a really good spot in terms of playability, I would say.